Good morning or afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have your attention, please. All quiet, please. Seems silly saying that. All right, so we're going to get started here on this new unit, Civil Rights and Social Movements in the Americas. You want to have that packet in front of you. That was one that I provided through Google Classroom. Basically just 2 pages. And this is a significant part of a IB history unit dealing with the civil rights movement, particularly in the Americas. And we're going to be focusing on the 1950s and 1960s in the United States of America. And this is a fascinating period of history. And we're going to be using a very effective documentary source, Eyes on the Prize. Well, you can see from the handout that we've got 6 episodes we're going to be going through, and this video will be giving you the notes and analysis for the first episode, Awakenings, 1954 to 1956. So you should take a look at that. That's where we're going to be doing the notes from. It's about 2/3 of the way down on page 1. And then we'll continue on through there. So you want to take careful notes on that. And just, I'm concerned that YouTube is going to block my video if I try to include that with this video. So I'll provide a separate link for the Eyes on the Prize episode. And so basically you'll get 2 different links, this one and the next one for Eyes on the Prize. So let's go ahead and get into this. All right, here we go. There I am. So you guys ready? All right. There we go, Eyes on the Prize, which is a very, very effective documentary that was done in 1987. And as we go through this unit, I'll be giving you some updates because a lot of things have happened since 1987, follow-up and so forth. More information. So basically we go back to looking at the civil rights movement for African Americans. And yeah, history of African Americans in the United States of America, very, very difficult. Slavery, yeah, covered that last year in United States history, which ended, yay, wow. Civil War, no more slavery, 13th Amendment, woo. And equal protection in the 14th Amendment, woo. And 15th Amendment, right to vote. Yeah, but we already covered this already. And when the Union troops got pulled out in 1870 in the South, segregation, Jim Crow laws, intimidation, KKK, all kinds of various terrible things were taking place in the South. And that's the way it was for decade after decade after decade. Yeah, social distancing in the 19th and 20th centuries, late 19th and more than for the first half of the 20th century. Yeah, the laws, the culture in the Deep South, and even other parts outside of the Deep South of the United States of America, there was separation. And we're not talking about just 6 feet and so forth. There was legal separation. There were areas that if you were African American, you couldn't leave your house at nighttime, and if you were to, I don't know, get a drink of water, you need to make sure that you go to the right fountain, if there even was one, or if you were like going into a grocery or a store and you thought, wow, I'll just go to the lunch counter and have a bite to eat. No, it was social segregation, and these are Jim Crow laws that were imposed on the South. And I mean, it was like the government elected by white people because black people couldn't be voting. And let's see, who else was enforcing these social distancing laws, this segregation, this separation? Yeah, the KKK. Yeah, this astounding image here. It almost looks like they're having just a really fun time, all these white people, as these 2 black men, not found guilty in any court of law for any kind of official crime and so forth, but must have done something, according to the crowd, that was a severe violation of their social expectations. And so they were beaten and hung, killed, and nobody is afraid of any kind of punishment. The KKK and I mean, they were like part and parcel of law enforcement, as well as leading businesses and so forth around in the Deep South. They got away with all kinds of terrible, terrible things. This is lynching, yeah. So there was compliance that was taking place. Some interesting things happened as you go through the 1900s. World War II, you learn some more about this in 11th grade in World War II history. African Americans in separate segregated units. But at the end of World War II, looking back and seeing the incredible contribution of African Americans to the war effort, our president, Harry Truman, in 1948, he's the executive, he decides that segregation in the military is not necessary anymore. So make sure you have that written down. 1948, the president does this. And who's in charge of the military? The president. Does this go to a vote for Congress? No. Can it be overdone by Congress? No. This is the president that does this. So this is going to be very interesting as we go through this unit. We're going to be looking at a series of presidents. Truman is going to be followed by, I wish I could show you the wall in my classroom, but he's going to be followed by Dwight D. Eisenhower, Republican. Truman's a Democrat. And Eisenhower will be in there, elected in 1952, re-elected 56. We'll be looking as well at John F. Kennedy, Democrat, elected in 1960. And then when he is shot and killed, we'll be looking at Lyndon Baines Johnson, who serves as the president in 1963 and all the way up until the end of 1968. So we'll look at these presidents. It's going to be very interesting to see the role that they play, that they can play, how much role can they play in the civil rights movement. But right here, Truman, he gets started on this right away, and he, in spite of opposition from many Southern whites, he said, right there, President Truman wipes out segregation in the armed forces. And you know about, of course, this very, very important case, Brown versus Board of Education, NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, and others pushing for years and years and years to get Plessy versus Ferguson overthrown. And the Supreme Court steps in unanimously. Make sure you have that written down. And that was a bit ahead of its time. In the decision by Earl Warren, and all 9 justices said segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. And of course, then it took a long time to get those schools desegregated, and we'll actually see that story told here in this unit as we go forward on that. But here's the Supreme Court stepping out and saying, yeah, African Americans should not be treated badly by law. And so now we've got 2 very, very important participants here. You know, the United States Supreme Court and federal courts, U.S. courts throughout the country, and then the United States presidency. You're thinking, well, who else is going to be involved there? Congress, state government, local government. We're going to keep an eye on those guys as well. Those are key players. And a reminder, Congress, you've got the House and the Senate. You're going to get some bill, some important bill, like a civil rights bill that will expand rights for African Americans and others. That has to get through the House, and it has to get through the Senate. And in the 1950s, all the way up until the early 1960s, if there were a handful of senators that didn't like some bill, they would filibuster it, and it would never get to a vote. The debate would never be over. The bill would be killed. Kind of like a sick version of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Mr. Smith, 1940s movie, he's a hero. One person stops a bad bill, but when you get a bunch of Southern segregationist white senators stopping a civil rights bill, that's not too good. So that will be changed. The filibuster rule will be changed. So keep an eye on that one as well. The NAACP will be focusing on them. There's going to be a lot of different unit groups that are going to be involved in this civil rights movement. And so we'll need to identify them, and there's going to be some distinctions among them, some cooperation, sometimes some conflict. among different groups advocating for civil rights progress. The NAACP, think of them as predominantly involved in legal activities, definitely in the courts, although they're not the only ones. And they've been around for a long, long time. Thurgood Marshall, who was the main attorney arguing for the Brown versus Board of Education case. Here's Roy Wilkins. You'll see him in the video as well. He is the head of the NAACP, the national head of the NAACP. And they're going to be focusing a lot of effort in the courts to get rid of segregation in schools, to get rid of segregation in public accommodations, busing, all kinds of various different things. So they're going to be a key player as we move through here. Okay, so let's keep an eye on this. We got 1948. The military is desegregated. 1954, we get Supreme Court stepping in. And then what's the next step? Well, among African Americans, there's a real sense that, okay, something can happen. Something's going to happen. We're starting to get some headway, although I tell you what, the resistance is building up against the president, the courts, and so forth. Well, what? 1955. The story now shifts to 1955 to a 14-year-old named Emmett Till. There he is. And he's from Chicago. Family in the Deep South, some of them after slavery ended, they were like, man, we're getting out of here, went up to, and so part of the family's up in the Chicago area, and Emmett Till is familiar with, the situation in Chicago, but he, in the summertime, goes and visits some cousins down in Money, Mississippi, small town, Money, Mississippi. So he's staying with his uncle, Mose Wright, and hanging out with his cousins and just enjoying some free time. Although he really doesn't understand the rules of the South and the expectations in the South. Yeah. Emmett Till and his buddies, they want some candy. They want to go into, and there's not a lot of shopping opportunities in Money, Mississippi, so they go into Bryant's. It's a store, it's got kind of a little bit of everything. And they want to buy some candy. And this is where things get bad. Emmett Till talks with the owner, or at least the wife of the owner. Her name is Carolyn Bryant, excuse me. And he talks to her, and he's, I don't know, fresh, I think is the word, a little sassy, I don't know. But the expectation in the Deep South is you don't talk to white women. And she was a white woman. She was a married white woman. And you're not supposed to talk to her that way. And oh my gosh, when Emmett Till's cousins heard what Emmett Till said, I mean, Emmett Till's like, that's just the way we talk. I mean, it's no big deal. What is the problem? And they're like, oh my gosh. And other people are like, oh my gosh, this is going to get really, really bad. I'm like, what? Did he do something? I mean, he's talked fresh. Yeah, there's Emmett Till. There's Carolyn Bryant. Yeah, there's her kids. Where is she? She's, oh, this is like, we'll get to that. Yeah, it's a big public gathering. So Carolyn Bryant tells her husband what Emmett Till had done, and the husband and his friend go looking for Emmett Till because they want to teach him about the way things work in the Deep South. So they find Emmett Till. They take him from the place where he's staying with Mose Wright. Next thing you know, Emmett Till is missing, but he's found, beaten and abused and attached to a piece of equipment that's dumped into the Tallahatchie River. And his body is recovered and taken back to Chicago. There's his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, and she insists on having an open casket funeral for Emmett. And hundreds of people go by and see Emmett Till's body that was brutally destroyed. And They want justice. Lo and behold, there actually is charges brought against J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant. There they are. They're the defendants in the court um, in Money, Mississippi, charged with murder, which is pretty amazing. Mose Wright testified, very bold of him. He testified against these men and identified them as having taken his nephew, Emmett Till, and oh my gosh, it is crazy. You're gonna get a close look at that, at how things play out. And this is a nationally covered trial. You get people from all over that are covering, like, what the heck is going on? Because you had this image of Emmett Till, who is just brutalized. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, here's the jury, all white. They're listening to the testimony. Wonder how they're going to come back. Not guilty. That's what Emmett Till looked like in the coffin. That's his body. The men got away with it. And actually, they got money from a reporter who talked to him afterwards, and they told exactly what happened and how they grabbed this guy, and he was in the back of the car, and he wasn't like, oh, I'm really sorry that I did anything wrong and so forth. And they were like, oh my gosh. And they beat him and they said this to the reporter. They beat him and beat him. They killed him. They're like, man, that's just the way we do things in the South. Now you're thinking, they fessed up to this after a not guilty verdict. Gonna be charged? Double jeopardy. They can't be charged again. Yeah. Of course, they're listening to the wife who said, oh yeah, he touched me and he got his hands all over me and so forth. See that? Years later, her conscience got the better of her. Years and years and years later, her conscience got the better of her, and she confessed to actually having lied to her husband and her brother-in-law. And yeah, but this got a lot of national attention. And Mose Wright was a very brave man. He left afterwards. He was like, he didn't want to like deal with any of the intimidation that was going to be coming his way, because of course he testified. And there were folks in the country that were like, man, this is huge. This has got to stop. This kind of thing has just got to stop. So our attention turns 1955 to the next year. Let me see, what did we have? Later that year in Montgomery, Alabama, some of you guys might be a little bit more familiar with this. You have a woman, Rosa Parks, who had been a secretary for the local office of the NAACP and had really, along with other African Americans in the Montgomery, Alabama and other areas in the South, they were just so tired of segregation. And there was a segregated system in the bus. A lot of African Americans take the bus. In fact, about 2/3 of the people that took the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, public transportation, about 2/3 of them were African Americans. And the rule was, you're supposed to give up your seat for white people. And I mean, you're supposed to sit in the back and not the front. And if a white person comes in, I mean, even if it's a white man and it's a black woman sitting in the seat, she's got to give up his seat for him. Blacks don't get to sit down. Rosa Parks, on December 1st, 1955, she said, nope, I ain't going to do it. And the bus driver was like, are you kidding me? So the bus driver pulled over at a stop and alerted the police, and Rosa Parks insisted, nope, not going to do it. She was arrested. So her defiance led to an arrest. And the African American community in Montgomery, Alabama was like, okay, what are we going to do? Well, this time they felt empowered. They were going to be like, okay, we got to make this thing work. This is stupid. This discrimination. So they got organized. They organized a bus boycott. They said, we're going to ride these buses if they're segregated. We're going to make sure that folks in charge of the bus operations are going to have to desegregate because otherwise they're not going to make any money. They're going to lose all of those customers. So this is the latter part of 1955. Rosa Parks, oh, look who comes into the situation here. A very, very young man, Martin Luther King Jr. Oops, Martin Luther King Jr. I should have typed Jr. in there. Son of Martin Luther King. And he's a reverend, grew up in the Atlanta area, came out to Montgomery to start as a young pastor. And he's like, yeah, I'll play a key role in organizing this bus boycott. So they form up what is called the Montgomery Improvement Association, and they get organized. And they know that if they're going to be boycotting the buses, it's not just like, oh, let's just like a few of us boycott the bus. No, they're going to try and organize the entire African American community in Montgomery to not ride the bus. Well, of course, if they're working, they still got to get to work, which is going to be a real problem. So they're going to have to organize carpools, and that's not going to be easy. Of course, some of the white women who were employing black women as maids and service help, they give them rides. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of different things going on here in order to get this thing going. And they're going to have to put pressure, financial pressure. One of the things that they're going to be doing, organizing this, so that we got Reverend King and we got Reverend Ralph Abernathy. We're going to see him. Keep an eye on him as we go through. Write his name down in your notes. And they're part of what is called the Southern Christian Leadership Council, the SCLC. So we're going to need to identify. That's going to be a very critical one we'll look at in this unit, the SCLC. And these are pastors, African-American pastors, leading parishes throughout the Deep South of pretty much predominantly African-American parishes. You got whites going to white churches and blacks going to black churches. And so they're going to be holding these rallies, regular rallies in churches with prayer and song and speeches and information and getting the word out and coming together and, you know, making sure that everyone knows what is going on week after week after week after week, discussing what it is that they're doing in the process of trying to win this boycott, because there had been previous boycotts that had failed and the law had not been changed. They had given up. This time they're like, we're not going to give up, right? This is very interesting because Martin Luther King Jr., he studied a man who had been successful in the 1930s and 40s in helping India come to independence. His name is Mahatma Gandhi. And he tapped into what turned out to be successful protest methods against the English. The British were the colonial masters of India, and they were, you know, democratic. They had a free press. You know, they had ideas that they're the good guys. And so Mahatma Gandhi's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be nonviolent. We are not going to cooperate with their laws. If we're going to have to be thrown in jail, yeah, we'll do that. We're definitely going to be peaceful. We're not going to fight back physically. Here's another key thing that we're going to be watching as we go through this. You want publicity. You want good publicity. You want other people in other parts of the country and the world to see what is going on here. Yes, you're being disobedient, but you're being disobedient in a way that draws sympathy, not scorn. You want to win the battle of public opinion, maybe in the Deep South, but most certainly in the rest of the country, in the North, in the Northeast, in the Midwest, and in the West of the United States of America. You want to have increasingly the federal courts and the Supreme Court coming in and saying, okay, we're going to be on your side as we go through here. So keep an eye on this. This is going to be a very, very important part of the civil rights movement. And it starts with Martin Luther King Jr., and he's following in the footsteps of Mahatma Gandhi. Who are going to be the opponents? Yeah. The White Citizens Councils of Alabama. Oh my gosh. Yeah, you need to write that one down. They oppose the boycott. They favor segregation. They oppose Brown versus Board of Education. They don't want the laws to change. They think that the best thing is separation, social distancing, separation of the races. And of course, one of their key tactics is intimidation, the KKK. I mean, they'll plant a cross, a burning cross, in the yard of one of the pastors, one of the SCLC leaders and NAACP leaders. They'll blow up their houses. They'll attack them. They'll intimidate them. They'll find out who was involved in the boycott, and they'll try and put pressure on the employers, some of whom belong to these white citizens councils, to get them to fire those blacks. So if you stand up against the whites, you're going to get fired. That's the least thing that's going to happen to you. So these guys are very, very, very organized to try and put pressure and intimidation. So here we go. We've got this bus boycott going and going and going, and the African Americans are sticking together in Montgomery. All right. I mean, it goes on throughout 1956. And yeah, you get some pretty worn out feet. But I tell you what, with these meetings, regular, going through here and keeping appraised of what's going on, is this thing going to work? Public opinion is starting to change somewhat in other parts of the country. Will it ultimately, will they get what they need in the course of an economic victory? Or how about a court victory? How about a court victory? It takes a while sometimes for a federal case to make its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. In 1956, federal case will make its way all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And this was November 13, 1956. The United States Supreme Court had a unanimous decision, just like the Brown versus Board of Education. Bus segregation, public transportation segregation is unconstitutional. You can't keep having segregation on a bus. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Ralph Abernathy, and all those brave folks win the case. And as a result, since the law is on their sides, the Montgomery Bus Company is going to have to desegregate, and the boycott is over. Victory, victory for the civil rights movement in this very first episode. So we give a lot of credence to the people who played a key role leading up to those events. And some of those names, I mean, you probably heard of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., but make sure you also have in mind Emmett Till, his mom, and his uncle, Most Right, who played a very, very critical role in that. So I'm going to sign off now, and make sure you tune in and watch the entire episode, supplement your notes so that you get a real good sense of that. This is episode number 1, Awakenings, 1954-1956, and I'll see you later. Be safe and be healthy.